Okay, so next on the agenda is me, actually. I was asked to give a presentation about where things are going to be going in ArchivesSpace, what ArchivesSpace is, some other things, sort of big picture things, which are probably a lot to cover in a short period of time. But I'm going to do a short presentation about some things that I think might help you in understanding how to sort of keep track of ArchivesSpace is, and also some background on what ArchivesSpace is. Some of these reflect questions that I get sort of from the uninitiated that are thinking a little bit more broadly than just how to use the application. We have really wonderful resources for how to use the application, including, if you weren't here for the first block of the online forum today, I highly recommend, if you're just sort of starting to think about ArchivesSpace or thinking about how you might implement ArchivesSpace, I highly recommend the presentation given by Madeline Sheldon and Anne-Marie Lyons. It really lays out lots of steps to think about, lots of decision points to think about, but also pulls together a lot of great resources as well. So this isn't so much going to be that, but it's going to be about sort of bigger picture things and background that might be helpful to you. So sort of the way I organized this was around kind of the question that is posed to me often, not really in, hopefully never in an accusatory manner, but more in a curious manner about what's going on with ArchivesSpace. So these are some things that I hope will help you think about why that isn't an answer that is always changing. So ArchivesSpace, by its nature, by the nature of archives in general or software programs in general, ArchivesSpace is always improving and evolving. So, but part of that is something that we really take as a central tenet of this program and of this community is that we want to be as transparent as possible and make as much information available as we can. So there is lots of information to share, and there's lots of different ways that information gets shared. So we know that can be overwhelming. So what I want to do here is highlight some key information and resources for who we are, what we're doing now, and where we're going. So I would say first and foremost, if you haven't heard it today, if you haven't gotten the gist of it today, in ArchivesSpace, community is everything. ArchivesSpace is community-supported software, and when we say community, we're not limiting the community to ArchivesSpace members. Members do have the greatest opportunity to influence the direction and participate in the activities that their financial and intellectual support makes possible, but we welcome the participation of anyone who's interested in ArchivesSpace. When it comes to sort of the member community participation and sort of our more formalized activities, community participation can be direct or it can be representative. We have 3 different governance groups that are either elected or appointed, and they, as representatives of the community overall, really guide the direction of this program. Those are the ArchivesSpace Governance Board, the Technical Advisory Council, and the User Advisory Council. And if you're within the member community especially, those are the people to reach out to if you have specific concerns about the direction of things and you want to provide information on where you think things should go in a bigger picture way. I should mention that though the Governance Board and the User Advisory Council, the membership of those is pulled only from ArchivesSpace members, the Technical Advisory Council is also open to non-members, participants, and we have some really great participants on that body right now that are from non-member institutions. We also have working groups, including groups like the one that put together this event. We have for people to participate in more as individuals. We have listservs, virtual and in-person events. We have a newish, it's not really new anymore, is it? but an implementation buddies program, which is our take on a mentorship program, and more. So these are different ways that people can get involved in the community and sort of be represented in their concerns or express their concerns or get involved in making, addressing their concerns. Something I get a question about a lot, and I know is confusing, is about what's the role of LYRASIS in ArchivesSpace? Is ArchivesSpace LYRASIS? Is LYRASIS ArchivesSpace? So I'm just going to try to give like a little bit of a summary of this that will hopefully help clear that up a little bit. So ArchivesSpace itself is an independent entity. It can be sort of free-floating if it had to be. But it would be, a pretty small entity. LYRASIS is a well-established nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide services and resources that help libraries, archives, and museums fulfill their missions. Now, LYRASIS is ArchivesSpace's organizational home. And what this means is ArchivesSpace, the entity, contracts with LYRASIS to manage its day-to-day operations and advise about longer-term needs and directions. As the organizational home, LYRASIS provides infrastructure and resources that all programs need. So things like fiscal management, human resources, basic IT infrastructure like access to email and computers and things like that, things that you would need even if you weren't working on building a software application, as well as staffing. Having a home in a larger organization gives ArchivesSpace access to much more than it would have otherwise. So if you think about it, ArchivesSpace has quite a small program team, and the program team, because LYRASIS provides these other things, doesn't have to do things like figure out how to cut a check for something or figure out how to set up an email server, things like that. The program team can really focus on the things that are specific to ArchivesSpace and making ArchivesSpace better for the community. LYRASIS itself does not drive the direction of ArchivesSpace. Rather, the ArchivesSpace Governance Board, as representatives of the community and the community overall, do. And the responsibilities with which the ArchivesSpace program team is charged are undertaken to benefit the community. There is a separate arm of LYRASIS that's called Digital Technology Services, and you've heard from some of those folks today. They provide tech support for members as part of an agreement between the ArchivesSpace program and Digital Technology Services, and they also provide optional hosting for anyone who's interested. So again, as you've seen today from our wonderful colleagues like Blake and Madeline who have been here on the forum, we have really great working relationships with the folks in Digital Technology Services. But the ArchivesSpace program team and Digital Technology Services team support the ArchivesSpace community in different ways. Something that people have been asking me about lately, if they've been following this in sort of the wider field, is they've heard that LYRASIS is merging with DuraSpace, and they want to know what the impact is going to be on ArchivesSpace of this merger. So I think kind of the overall summary that I want to give, well, I guess there's a few things that I want you to take away from this. One is that ArchivesSpace itself will continue to be guided by the ArchivesSpace Governance Board and the ArchivesSpace community overall. That won't change. ArchivesSpace continues to be its own entity, as I said, and has a relationship with LYRASIS, that LYRASIS will be its organizational home. So changes that happen with LYRASIS to LYRASIS's governance don't change the governance of ArchivesSpace. But when there are positive changes for LYRASIS as an organization, that can open up opportunities for ArchivesSpace. And I definitely think the DuraSpace merger is an example of opportunities opening up. DuraSpace is a smaller organization, smaller than LYRASIS, I should say, that provides support for open technologies. And LYRASIS and DuraSpace have voted to merge. The merger will take full effect by the end of June this year. So it's happening relatively quickly. Something that's exciting, I think, about this new LYRASIS organization is that it's going to have some things that ArchivesSpace will really benefit from. So these are things like access to greater combined financial and technical capacity, greater international reach and opportunities to better support communities outside the United States. And also there will be possibilities of easier collaboration and closer connection with existing DuraSpace projects like DSpace and Fedora. If you were here for Block A, Block A, earlier today, you heard from a couple speakers who were talking about integrations that they've made between digital repositories or digital asset management systems that they use and ArchivesSpace. And two of those were ones that have affiliation with DuraSpace. So it's possible that it may become even easier to integrate DSpace and ArchivesSpace, for example, now that DuraSpace and LYRASIS will be part of the same organizational home. There aren't a whole lot of very specific details right now. More will come into focus in the months ahead, and we'll definitely be communicating that as we can to the ArchivesSpace community. So then sort of looking at another area that certainly people are interested in and is important when they think about ArchivesSpace is thinking about development and how to follow development, how development priorities are set. So development priorities are determined by the ArchivesSpace community. And we have, I mentioned our governance groups. There is a cross-council group across the Technical Advisory Council and the User Advisory Council, a cross-council group called the Development Prioritization Subteam, which is specifically responsible for considering requests submitted by the community. We've mentioned, I think, a few times today that our development catalog is public, so people submit issues to our public catalog, or sometimes those issues have been there for quite a while. The Development Prioritization Subteam helps figure out which of those issues should move forward for development and which ones can maybe be closed up or maybe need more information to be passed through to a developer. The program team takes these prioritized issues and we assign them to developers that we work with as we have developers available. We have a large community. There are many things that people want from this application. So there are generally quite a few more issues that have been prioritized than we have developers to work on right now. But having the development prioritization subteam work through those gives us that kind of direction that we need to figure out how to use the resources that we do have, how to allocate those. I'll just mention a few things that are in the current and planned areas of development, larger development focus. We're always, of course, working on fixing bugs in the application, and people submit pull requests for smaller things, but these are sort of some larger areas of focus that we're working on either now or planning to be working on within the next year. So one is a specification for expanding the agents module in ArchivesSpace. We had a community group that worked on putting that together, vetted it through the community overall, and submitted it to be worked on. And some pieces of that have been phased in releases over the last year, but we're getting sort of towards the meat of it and hoping to get that in the spring. what that specification does is provide better standard support for EAC CPF and for MARC authority records. Once we have that kind of better standard support in, we'll be able to enable better integration with systems like SNAC and LCNAF. We're also working on staff interface improvements. I mentioned a little bit earlier that we had a staff interface enhancement group submit really wonderful recommendations for improving a number of areas of the application. This is another area where some of the smaller ones we've been able to phase in to the application. Some of the larger ones, like the permissions module that we were just discussing in the last session, that takes more work. That's going to require a bigger commitment of developer resources. So that's going to take more time, but it is definitely on our radar of something that we want to get done. The exciting things that people are really interested in often are things that really, or at least sort of the archivists working in the application are interested in, are sort of the things that make an impact on the way the interfaces look. But we also always have to be paying attention to the infrastructure of the application, making sure that it's staying current, making sure that we have an application that is not just good for now, but will be good for a number of years into the future. Our tech lead, Lainey McGlowan, is the person that pays particular attention to that. So we also have, on our plate thinking through infrastructure upgrades, including ways to get greater flexibility, perhaps for people to be able to swap in and out different components of our technical stack. We're looking maybe a little bit either further ahead or looking for, I guess, sort of literary warrant, looking for if there's enough interest out there, or these are directions that we can grow. We're looking at is improved language support. ArchivesSpace is localizable. You can provide translations. Translations don't necessarily have to mean from one language to another language, but could mean, customizing labels and things like that. But in this case, we would like to provide a user-friendly translation infrastructure for people who want to support different languages in the application, and be able to sort of perhaps crowdsource some translations and things like that. We'd also like to be able to support multiple languages in the interface for people that do description in multiple languages, say. Or the ability for a user to select their language, as well as crosswalks to other development standards. These are things that I would say our current user community hasn't clamored for quite as much, but there may be a potential user community out there that would. So if these are things that you're interested in or would be important to you in thinking about whether you'd adopt ArchivesSpace, we encourage you to get involved via membership or consider making some development contributions. We do have a public roadmap, and provided a link there. It's intended to help both the community and us keep track of our overall priorities for the application. We do aim to update the roadmap as releases go out or significant changes occur, but I will say that development and development planning, it's not an exact science, so timelines do shift. And if you'd like to learn more about our roadmap, we did do a webinar last year, and I'd encourage you to watch that. Just in general, how do you keep track of what's going on, and how do you identify opportunities to get involved yourself? I have attached a handout to our event page, a Getting Started handout that Christine Kim, our former community engagement coordinator, put together. It's very handy in sort of summarizing so many of the different resources that we have available. So take a look at that and see some of the different ways you can get started both with the application and with the community. Many of these resources have been mentioned throughout the forum today. And I will say we didn't direct anybody in their presentations today, and it's been amazing the number of things that people have said that if I were writing someone's presentation, I would have said myself. So it's wonderful that people are availing themselves of the resources in our community. And lastly, I just wanted to reiterate what I've said a few times today, which is that all are welcome in our community. So I encourage you to reach out to us or to each other at any time. I think you've heard a few people say that one of the things that really keeps them, excited about ArchivesSpace and really is a value to them about ArchivesSpace is that this community is so good. So we definitely think that that is our greatest strength, the diversity and the commitment and passion of those in our community. And we definitely welcome anybody who wants to participate in it. So that's what I have to say. I'm happy to take a few questions before we move on to the next presentation. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. All right, well, if there are no questions, I'm going to move along then, and feel free to reach out to me on the program team or anybody else on the program team at any time. We're happy to talk about issues like this.